It's not anything to be ashamed of to say, well, it kind of looks like that structure's worked quite well for the entire duration of mankind, and so maybe we mess with it at our peril.
You're hearing about family values from the childless and unmarried. Don't follow them.
The women have to stop blaming men for their sense of malaise or misery.
I didn't create you people to kill and torture and rape each other. I created you to be good to each other. I love the God who had a flood.
I just finished watching Sargon of Akkad's video with David Starkley on the dangers of reason, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I wish that they would talk longer, and I'm actually relieved to know that there is a part 2 coming out for that particular video, that is not the end of their discussion. And I'm excited to listen to it because he's absolutely correct. David Starkley is absolutely correct in so much that reason is a dangerous force when, in essence, used autistically. When reason is used in the void of reality, when it's assumed that one can use reason in the absence of reality, reason is absolutely destructive. There's absolutely nothing more dangerous than to use reason outside of the parameters of one's own determined existence. And there are predetermined factors for the circumstances under which we all live. There is no ideological paradise. There's no such thing as ideal circumstances. Reality is what it is, and the general gist of the video is that some of these French thinkers, these philosophers that came out of France, did so under the premise that they could philosophize away reality, that they could use reason to reject what currently is. And the thing is, you can't. You can't out-reason reality. And that was the fact that we are at a point in our political Overton window where we can have a discussion about reason being used in an ineffective manner. I mean, that this is something that you couldn't say 5 years ago. Reason has been put on a pedestal. If something is deduced by reason, it must therefore have merit and truth embedded in it. And that's not necessarily true. Logic and reason are confined to the, how would you say? It's not that they're confined. In fact, the fact that they're not confined is the problem. The conclusions of logic and reason in and of themselves do not necessarily mean that they are good or compatible with reality. And that's something that many people, especially in the internet sphere, don't understand. And it's not a question of whether or not you can justify it logically or reasonably. The question is whether or not it will have a good outcome in reality, in the world in which we live. And I was very relieved to go over this discussion because they come to a point where it's almost like, well, what do we do to use instead of reason? And he was very honest. He was very blunt. And he's like, the research, the data says that we primarily get a gut feeling and then we reason ourselves around it. And that's not a lie. Very few humans have the ability to emotionally detach themselves and make what is a truly honest and unbiased decision or position, and then adjust accordingly. No, we normally go with our gut, and then construct our worldviews around that instinct. And it was fascinating for him to search for answers and basically tell us it's almost a return to pathos in a way, a return to ethos as well, because what it is it's a rejection of complete reliance and veneration of the Logos. And that, to me, is a breath of fresh air. And the reason why it's a breath of fresh air is because I, for one, take great umbrage to the damage that Christian doctrine has taken from the pagan philosophers of Constantine, Aquila, Augustus, so on and so forth. I do not like these men for their philosophical thought, for their ability to define God out of existence. I don't like them for the... I've already spoken in a previous video how I don't like that they have venerated this attribute of altruism and then attribute it to God when there is no justification for it in the biblical canon. You can't justify the attribute of altruism to God in the biblical canon. It's all philosophy. It's all conjecture. It's all taking something as you imagine it should be and then taking the next logical or reasonable step forward. I believe that those steps in the theological realm of Christianity has, in a insurmountable way, harmed it greatly. And the reason I bring that up is because many people are wondering, especially at the end of this video, what is it? What is the end game of saying that reason is destructive? What are we getting ourselves into? We are leaving the comfort of pure logos, and we're branching out into something new. What does this something new look like? And I'm going to be very upfront. It looks like the kind of society that one would have in Leviticus, in Deuteronomy. Not necessarily Judges. Judges was a mess. But there was a prescribed and holistic and natural culture that the Bible prescribes. And it is full of nuances. It's full of exceptions, and it's full of strange caveats made for the comfort and needs of people at that time. And the more you study that law, and the more you study how it was meant to be applied and influence the people who lived during those times, it really was a truly progressive and the most merciful system that could possibly exist at that time. Obviously, it's not so by our standards today. That's a whole other discussion. But you would come to a society that would be approximately close to a modern interpretation of, I don't want to say theocratic, because that's wrong. What we don't understand about the ancient scriptures and the lifestyle that was prescribed is that it was very agrarian based. It was rooted in the realities of the agrarian man. And this agrarian man lived in the world of the threshing floor, the world of the winepress, the world of the millstone, all of these basic tools that they could work around. And it was, how do you say? It was very, primitive isn't the word. It was much more simple. It was much more simple back then at that time for them to build their societies around it, and it was agriculturally centered is what I'm looking for. And the thing that you notice if you were to take a step back and observe their feasts, their rituals, their sacrifices, the institution of the Levites as a group, an outside group that was interspersed within all of the nation of Israel, like this kind of a reminder to keep the law and to maintain the traditions and the feasts and the sacrifices. Israel had a system where it is not unreasonable to suppose that it is possible that they're maintaining the rituals of the sacrifices is what maintained their agriculture in what is a desert region. For example, the amount of sacrifices that they had to offer and they offered them twice a year. There were two main festivals, 6 months apart, and they would offer sacrifices for basically to atone for the entire people twice a year. And what this essentially did is when you sacrifice that much livestock, when you offer that much when you send that much smoke into the air, when you vaporize that much blood and send that much moisture into the air, and when the blood pours onto the ground and the rains come, you do two things. You're actually able to guarantee rainfall. You're able to control more or less, or to assist the natural ecosystem in generating enough moisture into the air to give yourself a predictable and sustainable rain pattern, which is helpful if you're in an agrarian society. The second thing that it did is it also, via the rains that would come and the blood that was spilt on the ground, it would revitalize the soil of every area that immediately was surrounding the area of the temple. If you had an orchard or a vineyard or a field next to in close proximity to the temple ground, you had the best crops, because all of that blood is soaked into the ground and the roots would search for the nutrients of the blood that was spilled on those festival days and throughout the entire year. And the reason that these traditions were maintained is because the Levites, who were interspersed throughout the entire nation, would literally remind the Israelites of their need to offer sacrifices, which were required to feed their fellow kinsmen. These people had no professional trade. They were from age 20 to I think it's 20 to either 40 or 60. They would serve in the tabernacle as essentially a standing guard, because very few of them, when the temple was built, actually needed to, carry and maintain the artifacts. No, their main job was to be essentially a standing army, and when they would retire from that post, they would be interspersed in Israel and to remind them of the laws and the rituals that they were obligated to perform. Another strange aspect of the sacrifices that were prescribed in Scripture is that they were very merciful to the poor. If you could not afford an ox, you could give a lamb. If you couldn't afford a lamb, you could give a goat. If you couldn't afford a goat, you could give turtle doves or chickens. If you couldn't afford that, you could bake a cake. So it's very odd to see this allegedly horrible, oppressive system offer so many graces, so many caveats, so many condescensions to help assist the populace in participating in these traditions so that they could maintain their ecosystem and their society at large. So what do we get when we leave reason and logos in its entirety? What happens is you take a step closer to ethos. And I'll be honest, if you were to read Scripture and read it honestly and take it at its own word, it's not a God based purely in logos. God is the God of ethos. He is the God because he built it. It's not because he's everything you say he is. It's because he's the boss. It is a position of power. It is a position of authority based on power, which is not something that the church fathers was comfortable admitting to. And so they were very mealy-mouthed when it came to justifying worshiping the God of Jacob. And that's something that has harmed the church, and it's harmed our discussions with both pagans and atheists. It's harmed our discussions in, discussing the honesty of pure reason and logos when we should, use better, more effective methods. But that's why it was particularly interesting for me to hear this video, and why I'm very excited to hear for part 2. Okay, also, as you all know, I'm working on a new RPG called The Shades of Dominion. This is a sort of a loose role-play style version of Magic the Gathering, but I'm going to take a little pause from that. There is a podcast for that coming, and I'll upload that to the other channel, link in description. And also, we're going to be doing a one-shot very soon, and I'm excited for it. It's going to be a Cthulhu-based one-shot with a few friends of mine, and we're going to be playing illegal immigrants crossing to the American border through Native American burial grounds. That's going to be our scenario, and we hope to see everyone there. Hope to see you then, guys. Bye.